Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into the absolute crucible of leadership and spiritual resilience, as found in the first epistle of Peter, chapter 5, alongside John Wesley's profound commentary. We're going to look at what it truly takes to lead when the pressure is fully on, and the surprising inner posture required to actually survive it. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. The weight of leadership. Tapinofrosini, our secret weapon, surviving the roaring lion, wrestling the unknown traveler, and finally, the humble example. All right, part 1, the weight of leadership. Think about the sheer, often crushing pressure that comes with spiritual or moral leadership. Put yourself in these shoes for a second. Imagine you're leading a church committee, heading up a massive project at work, or even just managing a chaotic household. You're under intense stress, right? Things aren't going perfectly. In that exact moment, how do you avoid the urge to just force your authority, to demand your own way, and lord your position over the people you're supposed to be leading? It's a heavy question, for sure. So we've got this massive contrast between our basic human instincts and the text's standard for leadership. On one side, you have the natural temptation. When the pressure's on, we just want to domineer. We want to lord over our heritage. But Peter, he sets a completely different holy standard. He says leaders are called to procure obedience not by force, but by actually becoming living examples to their flock, faithfully feeding them by both doctrine and discipline. And wow, John Wesley does not mince words when it comes to the motives behind taking on these roles. He vehemently warns against selfish motives, saying that leading merely for a larger salary or personal advantage is, quote, filthy beyond expression. Service, he argues, must never be done unwillingly as a burden, and absolutely not for filthy gain. True leadership, it requires a completely different heart. Which brings us to part 2, tapinofrosini, the secret weapon. Now, what's really interesting about this concept is that we're transitioning inward to the actual posture of the heart. Enter our Greek keyword, tapinofrosini. It translates to deep humility, but in the context of our study, we're not just looking at a vocabulary word here. This is a highly practical survival tactic. It is the absolute essential posture for Christian survival, community unity, and pastoral leadership. Literally, without it, the pressure is going to break you. So what does this actually look like in real life? Well, Wesley breaks this deep humility down into super practical, everyday actions. It means the younger are subject to the elder in years. It means everyone, like all of us, are subject to each other, actually ready to gladly give up our own will. It's about recognizing God's hand in all our troubles, and crucially, it means actively casting all our care and burdens onto Him the second we face pressure. You just aren't meant to carry that weight alone. And here's a really visceral metaphor from the text. We have to be clothed with humility. Back in the ancient world, this phrase literally implied tying on a servant's apron. You've got to tie humility to yourself so securely, so tightly, that no force in this world, no intense pressure, no nasty interpersonal conflict can tear it away from you. Moving on to part 3, surviving the roaring lion. Let's zoom out a bit to see why this humility is so desperately needed. The Apostle Peter commands believers to be highly vigilant, to awake, keep awake, and sleep no more. And as Wesley points out, this is a profoundly personal warning. Think about it. Peter himself had suffered deeply in his own life for a want of watching. He knows firsthand exactly what happens when you get too confident, drop your humility, and fall asleep at the wheel. Because the threat is real, and it is severe. The adversary operates like a roaring lion, just full of rage. But I want you to notice that second line, seeking with all subtlety. The adversary uses the exact subtlety of our own pride to swallow up a leader's witness and their very soul. If you aren't wrapped tightly in that humility, you are totally exposed to this subtle, consuming threat. Let's move to and see how this builds, because here is the incredible theological promise. If you maintain that humble vigilance through the suffering, which, by the way, Peter reminds us is just a blip compared to eternity, God Himself steps in. He will perfect you so no defect remains, establish you so nothing can overthrow you, strengthen you to conquer adverse power, and settle you securely like a house on a rock. Basically, you just have to watch and resist. God performs the rest. That takes us to part 4, wrestling the unknown traveler. To really anchor the emotional weight of this text, returning to Charles Wesley's classic hymn, Come, O Thou Traveler Unknown, sung to the tune of Candler. This hymn is honestly the perfect musical embodiment of everything we've just unpacked regarding the tensions of week 6. The lyrics vividly illustrate this agonizing, late-night wrestling of the soul. It captures that exhausting spiritual vigilance required of leadership when you're fighting against the adversary and, let's be honest, against your own pride. But beautifully, the song ultimately resolves in a posture of complete surrender, that tapeno forsini we talked about, trusting the God of all grace to finally settle and establish the believer after that long night of wrestling is over. And finally, part 5, the humble example. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how this ancient text applies to you right now. When you're facing the pressure of leadership, you're a massive target for burnout and the temptation to domineer. But through this tapene forsini shift, your whole approach flips. Instead of demanding authority, you consciously choose to be an example. Rather than relying on your own strength, you actively cast your cares on God. You stay awake, you stay vigilant. You survive the fiery pressure through God's strength, not yours. I want to wrap up our explainer today by reading this deeply resonant prayer right from the syllabus. Lord, you are the God of all grace. We ask that you clothe us with true humility, helping us to bind it so tightly to our lives that no force in this world can tear it away. Perfect, establish, strengthen, and settle us securely upon your solid rock. Amen. What an incredibly impactful final thought. So, the next time you find yourself crushed by the weight of leadership, ask yourself, are you going to rely on your own strength and risk being devoured, or will you bind yourself with a humility that no force in this world can tear away?